They're gone, but they're not gone. They left, but they're everywhere. In every notification you hope is them, in every song that reminds you of them, in every moment of silence when their absence screams louder than their presence ever did. Avery knew this haunting intimately 3 months since the breakup. 3 months of saying, "I'm over it." 3 months of pretending to move forward, while every cell in their body remained attached, anchored to someone who had hurt them repeatedly, and everyone said the same, useless things: "You deserve better. Just move on, focus on yourself." As if Avery had tried, as if the problem was lack of awareness or insufficient willpower, but the truth was darker, more complex, more rooted in places Avery couldn't reach, because here's what nobody tells you about letting go. You're not holding on to the person, you're holding on to what they represented, to fantasy you projected onto them, to the version of yourself you became in their presence, to the needs they pretended to meet, the wounds they seemed to understand, the completeness you felt despite the pain. And Carl Jung understood this. He knew that what we call love is often not about the other person at all. It's about the unconscious parts of ourselves we see reflected in them, the anima or animus, the inner masculine or feminine. We project onto them, making them carriers of our own psyche. And when they leave, they don't just take themselves, they take the projection. They take the part of you that you'd placed in them, and that's why it feels like losing yourself. Because in a way, you did. You gave away pieces of your psyche, expecting them back, transformed, healed, completed. But they just left with them. And now you're incomplete, not because they were your other half, but because you literally invested parts of yourself in them, and don't know how to retrieve them. So you stay attached, hoping they'll return, bringing your missing pieces back. But they won't, because those pieces were never theirs to hold. They were always yours, waiting to be reclaimed. You think you love them? But Jung would ask, did you love them, or did you love who you imagined them to be? Did you love the actual person or the fantasy you projected onto them? Because there's a difference. Vast and devastating. Avery replayed the relationship like detective, searching for clues, trying to understand what was real and what was projection. And the discovery was painful. The person Avery had loved, the one who seemed to understand them so deeply, to see their soul, to complete their missing parts, that person never actually existed. Avery had taken their own unconscious ideal of perfect partner, their anima, the inner feminine. They'd never integrated and placed it on someone else's face, like mask, like filter, like hologram. And through that filter, everything the other person did was interpreted as meaningful, as soulmate behavior, as destiny. Even the red flags, especially the red flags, their emotional unavailability, read as mysterious depth, their inconsistency read as passionate intensity, their manipulation read as caring enough to guide them. And Avery isn't stupid, isn't naive, isn't foolish. This is how projection works. It's unconscious. By definition, you don't know you're doing it until after, when the projection collapses, when the real person shows through, when you realize you've been in relationship with your own psyche, not with them. And that's why letting go is so hard. Because you're not letting go of them. You're letting go of the idealized version, the fantasy, the projection. You're letting go of the part of yourself you saw in them and haven't yet found in yourself. Jung said we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. And romantic partners are often the most powerful disguises of all. They wear the face of other, but carry the essence of our own unconscious, and when they leave we mourn not them but ourselves. The self we became in their presence. The self we thought we could only be through them. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to be acceptable to others. And Avery had perfected theirs. In the relationship, Avery became whoever the partner needed, patient when they needed stability, exciting when they needed stimulation, understanding when they needed forgiveness, and piece by piece, Avery's actual self, the one with needs, with boundaries, with a voice, got quieter, until it was just whisper, then just silence. And the partner never knew the real Avery, because the real Avery never showed up. Just the persona, just the performed self, just the version designed to be loved. And here's the cruelest irony. The partner fell in love with persona, not with Avery. So when they left, they didn't actually leave Avery. They left character. Avery was playing, but it feels like they left real. You, 'cause you'd forgotten there was a difference. You'd worn the mask so long it felt like face. And now you're mourning the loss, but also terrified of letting go, because if you let go of the relationship, you let go of the persona. And if you let go of the persona, who are you underneath? What if there's nothing there? What if the real you, the one you buried to be loved, is gone? What if you can't find them again? This is why letting go feels like death. Because in a way it is. It's death of false self, of performed version of the character you created to be worthy of love. And facing that death means confronting the question you've avoided your whole life. Who am I without the mask? Who am I when I'm not performing? Who am I if I'm not what others need me to be? And that question is terrifying. So you stay attached to the relationship, to the pain, to the person who hurt you. Because staying attached means you don't have to answer it. It means you can keep performing, can keep being the persona, can avoid void underneath. But Jung says the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you really are. And that requires letting the persona die, requires removing the mask, requires facing the terrifying freedom of being yourself, without guarantee that anyone will love what they find. But there's something even darker at play. Something Jung called the shadow, the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, buried, and those parts don't disappear. They don't dissolve, they attach. They find someone to carry them for you. And often that someone is exactly the person you can't let go of. Avery, the shadow, contained rage. The anger at being overlooked as child, at having needs dismissed, at learning love was conditional. And Avery buried that rage, learned that anger was unacceptable, that good people don't feel that being understanding was virtuous, and being angry was shameful. So rage went into shadow and stayed there waiting. And then Avery met someone who embodied that rage, someone who could express anger freely, who didn't suppress, who took up space, who demanded attention. And Avery called it attraction, called it "can't explain why I'm drawn to them." Jung would say you're drawn to your own shadow, projected onto another person. You're attracted to the parts of yourself you've disowned. And when the relationship became toxic, when the partner's anger turned toward Avery, when the very quality that attracted them became the weapon that hurt them, still couldn't leave, because leaving would mean acknowledging the shadow, would mean admitting, I'm also angry. I also have rage. I also want to take up space without apology. And that admission would shatter the good person identity Avery had built. So Avery stayed with the pain, stayed with person who hurt them, stayed attached to someone who embodied everything Avery had repressed, because as long as the shadow is projected onto someone else, Avery doesn't have to face it in themselves. But Jung warns, what you don't face in yourself, you'll meet as fate over and over. You'll attract people who carry your shadow. You'll stay attached to them. You'll call it love, call it connection, call it can't let go, when really it's your own disowned self, refusing to be ignored anymore. And then there's the anxiety, the tightness in chest, the racing heart, the checking phone compulsively, the interpreting every silence as rejection. Everyone calls it attachment style, gives it clinical name, anxious attachment, as if naming it explains it. But Jung would go deeper, would ask, why is the attachment anxious? What wound is being activated? What childhood pattern is being repeated? Avery's anxiety wasn't about the present person. It was about 8-year-old Avery, whose parent was inconsistent, present one day, absent the next, loving when convenient, dismissive when stressed. 8-year-old Avery learned that love is conditional, is unreliable, that you have to monitor constantly, stay vigilant, read every micro-expression, every tone shift, because your survival depends on tracking the emotional availability of your caregiver, and that tracking system, that hypervigilance, constant monitoring, never turned off. It just waited for adult relationship to activate it. And when Avery met someone emotionally inconsistent, someone who hot and cold, present, then distant, affectionate, then withdrawn, 8-year-old's alarm system went off, screamed danger, screamed monitor, screamed if you lose attention, you lose love, you lose safety, you lose everything. And Avery called this anxiety, called it overthinking, called it I'm being too sensitive. But Jung would say no, this is your child's self, still trying to survive, still believing their worth depends on another person's mood, carrying the wound that said, you're only lovable when convenient. And the anxiety won't go away by understanding. It won't disappear through breathing exercises, through meditation, through trying to be more secure, because the anxiety isn't the problem, it's the symptom. The problem is the unhealed child inside, still believing that love withdrawal equals death, still operating from survival mode, still convinced that letting go of this person means losing everything, when really letting go means finally giving that child what they needed all along. Not the inconsistent partner, but your own consistent presence, your own reliable love, your own promise. I won't leave you, I won't abandon you even when they do. Jung spoke of psychic fragmentation. What happens when you split yourself to maintain relationships, when you amputate parts of yourself to fit, when you silence your needs to keep peace. And Avery was fragmented, was living in pieces. One part, performing calm, while inside screaming. One part saying fine while drowning in resentment. One part pretending not to care while dying for attention. And this fragmentation creates unbearable internal tension, creates the sense that you're living someone else's life, creates the feeling that you're disappearing, that you're watching yourself from outside, wondering, who is this person? Where did I go? What happened to me? And the anxiety people call attachment. Anxiety is actually this fragmentation, is the war between your parts, is one part knowing you should leave, and another part clinging desperately, is one part recognizing the toxicity and another part making excuses, is one part wanting to be authentic, and another part performing for approval. And you can't let go, because letting go would require wholeness, would require all your parts agreeing, would require you to choose yourself completely. But you can't, because you're not integrated. Scattered, you're living in pieces, and those pieces have different agendas, different fears, different needs, and they're fighting each other, creating the paralysis, creating the endless loop of almost leaving, but never quite doing it. Jung said the foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. And this is that moment. The suffering of facing your fragmentation, of gathering your pieces, of admitting how much you've betrayed yourself to maintain this relationship, and that suffering feels unbearable. So you stay attached to the pain, you stay attached to the person you stay in, the relationship, even when it's killing you. Because staying is familiar, and the unknown of wholeness, of integration, of choosing yourself completely, that's terrifying. And then one day something breaks. Not the relationship that's been broken. The tolerance for self-betrayal breaks, the willingness to stay small breaks, the acceptance of fragmentation breaks. And in that breaking moment of hitting absolute bottom moment of, I can't live like this anymore, Jung's process of individuation begins. Individuation, the journey of becoming who you actually are, not who others need you to be, not who your wounds trained you to be, not who your fears convinced you to be, but who you are beneath all of it. Avery reached that moment sitting on bathroom floor after another cycle of hope and disappointment, after another text ignored, after another promise broken, after another sacrifice that went unrecognized, and instead of the usual spiral into self-blame, into what did I do wrong, into how can I fix this, a different voice emerged, quiet but clear. This isn't about them, this is about me, and why I keep choosing this. And that question changed everything, because it moved responsibility, not blame, but responsibility, from external to internal, from why are they doing this, to why am I allowing this, from how can I change them, to how can I change myself. And individuation began with dramatic ending, not with final confrontation, but with quiet turning inward, with beginning to ask, what parts of myself have I abandoned to maintain this? What aspects of my authentic self did I amputate? What needs did I silence? What boundaries did I dissolve? What voice did I suppress? And asking these questions, Avery began to see the cost, the enormous psychological cost of maintaining this attachment, and realized that letting go wasn't about being strong enough. To leave it was about being whole enough to stay with yourself. Jung said we must withdraw our projections before we can truly see either ourselves or others, and this is the hardest work, the work of taking back what you gave away, of recognizing that the qualities you admired in them were actually your own qualities projected, of understanding that the completeness you felt with them was your own wholeness externalized. Avery began the process of reclamation, started asking, every time I missed them, what am I actually missing? And the answers were revealing missed their understanding. But Avery was understanding, had always been, just gave it to others, never to self, missed their strength. But Avery was strong, had survived everything, just never acknowledged it, missed their presence. But Avery was present to everyone, except themselves. Each quality Avery had projected onto the other person was actually Avery's own quality, disowned, externalized, play on another person's shoulders, and then worshiped there. And this is why the attachment felt so strong, because Avery wasn't attached to external person. Avery was attached to their own projected self, to their own anima, to their own unlived potential. And reclaiming the projections meant recognize, contain the understanding I seek. I embody the strength I admire, I have the presence I crave, I don't need them to provide these qualities. I need to stop giving these qualities away. And as Avery reclaimed each projection, the attachment loosened, not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped needing. Because what they'd been seeking in the other person, they finally found in themselves. And this is what letting go actually is: not pushing someone away, not forcing yourself to stop caring, but naturally releasing. Because you've taken back what was yours and no longer need them to carry it. But here's what nobody tells you about letting go, even when you understand the projections, even when you've begun. Individuation, even when you know intellectually that the attachment was unhealthy. There's still grief, massive, sacred, necessary grief. Not for the person, but for the fantasy, for the version of yourself. You were in the relationship for the future. You imagined for the years, invested for the belief that this time it would be different. Avery sat with his grief. Let it come in waves, let it be messy, ugly, human, and discovered that grief is not the enemy of letting go. Grief is the mechanism of letting go. Grief is how you metabolize loss, how you integrate what happened, how you honor what was without staying trapped in it. Jung understood this. He knew that psychological growth requires mourning, requires sitting with the death of old self, with the collapse of illusions, end of patterns that no longer serve. And this grief is sacred because it's the grief of becoming, because it's the pain that precedes rebirth, because it's the necessary dying before the living. You're not just grieving them, you're grieving the person you were when you were with them. You're grieving your own innocence, your belief that love alone is enough, your fantasy that the right person will fix everything. You're grieving your childhood wounds, that this relationship activated your patterns that kept you stuck, your time that you can't get back. And this grief deserves space, deserves acknowledgement, deserves to be felt fully, not pushed down, not bypassed, not rushed through, but experienced as the holy process it is. Because on the other side of this grief is not just moving on, is transformation, is integration, is freedom, is the you that you were always meant to become once you stop betraying yourself for someone else's conditional love. And then, one day, not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, quietly, certainly you realize you've let go. Not because you forced it, not because you did the steps, not because time healed, but because you've changed at such fundamental level that the attachment simply dissolved. Avery woke up one morning and noticed hadn't checked X's social media in days. Phone notification came and heart didn't race, hoping it was them. Saw something funny and didn't immediately think, I wish I could share this with them. And in the absence of attachment wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space to breathe, space to become whoever they were supposed to be, without performing, without fragmenting, without betraying themselves. And this is what liberation actually feels like. Not the high of being over it, not the performance of having moved on, but the quiet truth of being okay, of being whole, yourself without needing someone else to complete you. Jung's promise was this: when you become who you really are, you stop attracting people who require you to be someone else. When you integrate your shadow, you stop being drawn to people who embody it. When you heal your wounds, you stop seeking partners who activate them. When you become whole, you stop seeking completeness in another person. And Avery understood finally that letting go was never about them. It was about the journey back to self, about reclaiming projections, about integrating shadow, about healing wounds, about gathering scattered pieces, about becoming whole. And in that wholeness, in that integration, in that return to authentic self, the attachment to the person who hurt them simply didn't fit anymore, because you can't stay attached to someone who requires your self-betrayal. When you finally refuse to betray yourself, and this is the liberation, the true freedom, not from them, but from the patterns, from the wounds, from the false self that kept you bound. And as you stand here now, in your own wholeness, Jung's words echo the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you really are. And perhaps letting go was never about losing someone. Perhaps it was always about finding yourself. Comment below, what are you ready to let go of, to finally become whole? And watch the next video, because this journey doesn't end, it deepens, and you're just beginning to understand how free you can actually be.